One surgeon, one operation, 3 deaths. In the 1840s, a man so fast with a blade that he could amputate a leg in under 30 seconds accidentally killed not just his patient, but 2 other people in the room. Imagine surgery without anesthesia. No painkillers, no sedation, just a leather strap between your teeth and men holding you down while a surgeon cuts into your living flesh. This was the reality of operating theaters in the early 19th century. The longer a surgery lasted, the more likely the patient was to die, from shock, from blood loss, from the sheer trauma of experiencing their own body being cut apart. Speed wasn't a luxury. Speed was everything. And nobody was faster than Robert Liston. Born in 1794 in Ecclesmachan, Scotland, Liston stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, a towering figure in an age when the average man barely cleared 5'6". His hands were enormous, his grip iron, and his confidence borderline terrifying. By his 20s, he had earned a reputation in Edinburgh that would follow him for life. But not all of it was flattering. Liston was brilliant, yes, but he was also ruthless. He clashed with nearly every colleague he worked with. He was expelled from the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh, not for incompetence, but for insubordination. He once broke into a locked hospital ward to operate on a patient his rivals had refused to treat. The man survived. Liston didn't apologize. He simply moved to London in 1835, where University College Hospital gave him a stage worthy of his ego. And make no mistake, it was a stage. In the 1830s and 1840s, surgery was public theater. Paying spectators packed into wooden galleries above the operating table, craning their necks for a better view. Medical students pressed shoulder to shoulder. The air reeked of blood and sawdust. And when Robert Liston strode into the room, the crowd fell silent. He would turn to the gallery and utter his signature phrase, "Time me, gentlemen. Time me." Then the blade would flash. Liston could amputate a leg in under 2.5 minutes. Some accounts claim he did it in 28 seconds. He was so fast that witnesses compared watching him to watching a conjurer. Blink, and you'd miss the incision. He would clamp the knife between his teeth while tying off arteries with both hands. Assistants struggled to keep pace. The gallery erupted in applause like a concert hall. But speed like that comes at a cost. Because Liston wasn't just cutting through flesh and bone. He was cutting blind. In an era before sterile technique, before x-rays, before any understanding of germ theory, surgeons operated on feel and instinct alone. And when your hands move faster than your eyes can follow, mistakes happen. Liston once sliced off a patient's testicle along with the leg he was amputating. But his most catastrophic moment, the one that would echo through centuries of medical history, was still ahead. The exact date has been lost to time, but the event is recorded by the medical historian Richard Gordon and has been passed down through generations of medical students like a ghost story whispered in lecture halls. The setting, University College Hospital, London, sometime in the early 1840s. A man lies strapped to the operating table, his gangrenous leg exposed for all to see. The galleries are packed to capacity. Liston's young assistant stands beside him, hands ready to grip the diseased limb. And in the front row of spectators, an elderly gentleman clutches his walking stick with white-knuckled hands, watching with a mixture of horror and fascination. 3 people. None of them know that within minutes, all 3 will be dead. Liston rolls up his sleeves. He surveys the room with the calm of a man who has done this hundreds of times. The crowd goes quiet. He grips his amputation knife, a long, curved blade designed for a single, devastating stroke, and nods to his assistant to hold the patient's leg steady. Then he speaks the words the gallery has been waiting for. "Time me, gentlemen." The blade descends. It moves so fast that eyewitnesses later struggle to describe what they actually saw. One moment there is a leg. Then there is a spray of arterial blood, the grinding shriek of steel-biting bone, and a scream that fills the theater from floor to gallery. But Liston doesn't stop. He never stops. In his ferocious downward stroke, Liston's blade doesn't just sever the patient's leg. It keeps going. The assistant, whose job is to hold the limb steady, has his fingers gripped too close to the incision line. Liston's knife slices clean through 2 of the young man's fingers. They drop to the sawdust-covered floor alongside the severed leg. The assistant recoils in agony, blood streaming from his mutilated hand. But there is no pause, no acknowledgement. In the frenzy of a 19th-century amputation, severed fingers barely register as a complication. Liston ties off the arteries, sutures the skin flap closed, and the patient is carried away on a stretcher. The whole affair takes less than 2.5 minutes. But the killing has only just begun, because during that same wild arc of the knife, the very tip of Liston's blade slashed through the coat of the elderly gentleman seated in the front row. The man felt the steel whisper across his body. He looked down and saw the gash torn through his fine clothing. And in that instant, his mind reached a conclusion far worse than reality. He believed he had been stabbed. He believed the surgeon's knife had sliced open his abdomen. An absolute, primal terror seized every fiber of his being. His face went white. His hands clutched at his chest. And right there, in the gallery of University College Hospital, his heart stopped, dead before anyone could reach him. The official cause of death, fright. The spectator's death was instantaneous. But the other two victims took longer to fall. In the days following the operation, the patient's surgical wound turned septic. Gangrene, that rotting, blackening plague of pre-anesthetic surgery, consumed his stump. Without antibiotics, without any understanding that invisible bacteria were devouring his flesh, the man had no chance. He died in his hospital bed. And the assistant? The young man who lost 2 fingers to Liston's reckless blade? His wounds festered with the same merciless infection. Gangrene spread from his mutilated hand through his bloodstream like wildfire. He died shortly after the patient. 3 people had entered that operating theater alive and whole. Not a single one survived. 1 operation, 3 deaths. Medical historians would later calculate what no one had ever calculated before. This was the only recorded surgical procedure in history with a 300% mortality rate. The patient, the assistant, and a bystander who never even touched the operating table. Let that number sink in. 300%. A surgeon walked into a room to save 1 life and ended 3. Not through malice, not through ignorance, through the very quality that had made him famous. Speed. And here is what most people don't know. Robert Liston wasn't a butcher. He was, by every measure of his era, one of the most gifted surgeons alive. His speed saved hundreds of patients who would have died under slower hands. But in one terrible moment, that gift became a curse. And yet, his story doesn't end here. Because on December 21st, 1846, Robert Liston stood in that same operating theater and changed medicine forever. He performed the first major operation in Europe using ether anesthesia. The patient was a butler named Frederick Churchill with a badly infected knee. For the first time in the history of British surgery, the patient felt nothing. No screaming, no thrashing, no desperate need for speed. When it was over, Liston, this towering giant who had spent his entire career racing against human agony, turned to the stunned gallery and uttered just 4 words. This Yankee dodge beats mesmerism. The age of painless surgery had begun, and the man who ushered it in was the same surgeon who once killed 3 people with a single stroke. Liston died barely a year later, on December 7, 1847, at the age of 53. An aortic aneurysm took him, swiftly and without warning, as if fate decided only speed could claim the fastest surgeon. But his legacy dwarfs that one catastrophic operation. He performed 66 major amputations at University College Hospital with a mortality rate of only 10%. Extraordinary when the national average hovered near 1 in 4. He pioneered techniques still referenced in surgical textbooks to this day. And yet, history remembers him for the worst 2.5 minutes of his career. The fastest surgeon who ever lived, frozen in time, defined forever by the one moment he should have slowed down. 300% mortality. 1 blade. 3 lives erased in under 3 minutes. Robert Liston wanted to be remembered as the man who conquered pain. Instead, he became the cautionary tale whispered in every medical school on earth. And the next time someone tells you that faster is always better, remember the operating theater at University College Hospital, where speed itself became the deadliest instrument in the room.